New podcast tools from YouTube, the latest from Podnews.net with critically acclaimed, highly addictive CBC podcasts. YouTube has announced a test to allow podcasters to create and measure podcasts in YouTube Studio. If you're in this experiment, you can upload a podcast, view podcasts, and mark existing playlists as podcasts, presumably so that they appear on the YouTube Podcasts homepage, which is a US exclusive for now. It also adds analytics. It's another slow step towards podcasts on the platform. Well, you don't need video to be highlighted on YouTube's podcast homepage, we notice, like Wait, Don't Tell Me, which is just a static thumbnail. On the page, YouTube appears to have rolled out version 3 of their podcast icon. It's blue now. We hope YouTube is genuine about wanting to work with the podcast industry, but in spite of our regular contact with YouTube's PR, the company has made no communication about this or indeed any comms about their podcasting features, and we look forward to working with them to help them communicate their plans accurately. Podcast transcripts, including live captions, are now available in a new tool called Steno FM, which was launched on Friday. We'll link to an example showing a recent episode from Buzzcast and a list of hosts who support them. Podbean's podcast app on both Android and iOS supports transcripts and captions via the new podcast namespace. Listen to this show for an example. Cast Media and Big IP Media have announced a multi-year partnership. The companies have now partnered on 5 shows. All the best podcasters are filling in the Podnews report card. Your feedback will go back anonymously to the podcast platforms and help them know where to improve. If you're one of the best podcasters and you've not yet filled it in, we'd suggest you rectify that. You can find it at podnews.net/report card and the results at Podcast Movement. The Swiss Podcast Awards will be presented on March the 15th in Zurich. The organisers have also launched an app called Swiss Podcasts, which contains shows from the country. In Austria, the winners of the E3 Podcast Awards were announced. The winner was Wer nicht weiße, muss alles essen, the slightly confusingly titled If You Don't Know Anything, You Have to Eat Everything. It's a podcast covering animal welfare, agriculture and nutrition. In England, the Yorkshire Post publishes an interview with the owner of a podcast studio company in Wakefield. And, big fan of your podcast. May I ask you something? We'd be curious if it's just us that gets these in our email. In People News, Efim Shapiro joins the New York Times today as the senior audio engineer for Times Opinion. He joins from Vox. It's a Monday, so time for some tech stuff. The Podcast Index website now shows cross-app comments for individual podcast episodes, where that's been enabled by the podcaster. The Podcasting 2.0 podcast is a good place to see those. How many requests by an Apple Core Media user agent are Apple Podcasts? We've recalculated those figures based on the last 90 days, and we can tell you that 63% of all Apple Core Media traffic is not from Apple Podcasts. Now that Apple Podcasts is implementing the code to stop using Apple Core Media as its user agent in some circumstances, we link to the other apps that need fixing, according to John Spurlock: Podbean, Castro, Fountain, Podcast Republic, Moonbeam, PlayerPod, Pods, Bullhorn, Luminary, Listen App, and Audible. That means all of those apps are appearing smaller than they should in podcast analytics. RSS.com no longer exposes their users' email addresses in RSS feeds. You can turn that back on temporarily for legacy apps to verify you. And Visual Studio Code has a specific editor for editing SRT or VTT subtitle files. And in podcast news, Podcasting 2.0 has Nathan Gaithright as a guest this week, who's launched Steno FM. Why do people make certain decisions? Why do they believe in what they do? Why are they who they are? And what happened along the way? Neil Mitchell Asks Why is new from the Melbourne-based radio broadcaster and looks to be his first native podcast. His breakfast show on 3AW has more than twice the market share of his nearest competitor. And the new season of Bear Brook is out today, 5 years and more than 21 million downloads after its debut. Still hosted by Jason Moon, the new season looks at a murder that ended with the conviction of a 19-year-old with just one piece of evidence, a taped confession. But the confession might not be all it claims to be. This podcast is sponsored by CBC Podcasts. The team that brought you Let's Make a Sci-Fi is making a rom-com. With the help of Hollywood experts, Comedians Maddie Kelly, Ryan Beale and Mark Chavez try to balance love and laughs into a fresh, funny and heartfelt movie script. Let's Make a Rom-Com is out now, wherever you get your podcasts. And that's the latest from our newsletter. To read all the stories and subscribe, we're at podnews.net.